Hello, my name is Saito Cash, and today we're going to be doing a breakdown over my recent Eurorack performance that I titled Grandizer. You can find that video on my channel somewhere, and in the description I will be posting a link to my modular grid so you can actually see all the information on all the modules I have here. We're going to be going over the drums, the bass, the chords, the melody, and some of the effects and techniques I used to create the performance. First things first, I do want to point out that I have a specific workflow when it comes to doing live performances with the Eurorack system. You'll see that I'm sporting two Arturia Rack Brute 6U cases. The bottom case contains most of the modules where a lot of my filters, modulation, and oscillators are coming from. And this is the case where I do a lot of the hands-on modulation, whereas the top of the deck contains mostly effects, excluding the Morphogene and the Micro MIDI. I think if you're getting into Eurorack or you own one and you're just not finding a really good workflow for it, even though you have a lot of great modules, I always tend to find that if you place a lot of the modules that you have to mess with into an easy slot, then you'll have a much better time performing a lot of different fun tricks. So let's get into this. Let's look at how I kept all of my modules in time. For this, I used ALM's Pamela's New Workout module. Pamela's New Workout is a very popular master clock and modulator unit among the Eurorack community. It has 8 editable outputs that produce control voltage signals that are correlated and synced to a BPM-based master clock. And what all that technical jargon means is that each output sends out a rhythmic waveform that can oscillate at different divisions or multiples based off of the speed of the current BPM. For example, if I set the BPM to 128 and set output 1 to times 1 speed, output 1 will send out quarter note triggers playing at the speed of 128 BPM. If I change output 1 to have times 2 the speed, then it will be sending out eighth note triggers. So let's see how I set up all of these outputs for my performance. First of all, I set the BPM to 128. Output 1 is set to play on every fourth note, so it's at times 1 speed. I will send this clock to my sequencer. Next, I want output 2 to play at 4 times this speed, which will send out 16th notes. I will send this to my DFAM, which will act as my baseline generator for this performance. I'm going to leave output 3 empty. Output 4 is also going to be set at times 4 speed. This out will go to my bitbox and keep its global clock in time with my performance. This allows me to play back any percussion loops that I want to be quantized to the performance. Outputs 5 through 8 will play a slightly different role. Instead of keeping the time on any specific module, I'm going to be using the rhythmic waveforms to trigger one-shot samples that I have in my bitbox. Anytime a gate or a trigger CV is sent to one of these inputs on the bitbox that correlate to one of the cells in the grid, the sample or loop in that cell will be triggered. To get the 4 on the floor groove I had for the performance, I'm going to have to tweak some of the settings for some of the outputs to affect each drum in its own manner. For a 4 on the floor groove, the kick drum needs to be playing on every beat, the hi-hat needs to be playing on the and of every beat, and the snare drum has to be playing on the 2 and 4. And we're going to sprinkle in a little bit of snare percussion just to give it some groove. For you to be able to hear what's happening, I'm going to be patching output 1 on my bitbox into my mixer. Output 5 is set to times 1 speed, which will play quarter notes, and this will be sent to the kick drum. Output 6 will be sent to the clap. It is set to play on every half note. However, the clap plays on the downbeats, which are beats 1 and 3. We want the clap to play on the upbeats instead. To do this, I can offset the phase of the clock being produced by output 6 in the settings so that the clap still plays on half notes but starts at a different point in time. I will set the phase to 50%. Now, the clap does not play on beats 1 and 3, but 2 and 4, because the clock starts at the trough of the rhythmic waveform and then waits a beat before hitting the wave's peak. We're going to be going a little bit out of order here, but output 8 is sent to the closed hi-hats. It's playing quarter notes, but similar to the clap, I've set the phase of output 8 to 50%. The hats will play on the ands of each beat now. I have also added 5% to the slope setting, which is similar to adding groove. This will make the 4 on the floor pattern a little bit more groovy. And finally, output 7 is sent to the snare perk. The timing is set at /8, which will play every 2 bars, and the phase is set to 77%, so that it will play on the of a beat, which is the 4th 16th note of a beat. Of course, this isn't the exact settings I used for the snare percussion in the performance, but because I didn't save the clock settings like an idiot from the performance, this will be the settings I'm going to use for this tutorial. So moving on, we're going to be focusing on some of the drum effects and mixing techniques for the performance. Because the drum one-shots are being autonomously activated, I have to mute them manually. There is a mix window on the bitbox where I can do this. However, I don't have quick access to the loops, which I also have to trigger manually. This is a problem since I have to remove some drum elements for a fill before introducing more energy in the performance by reactivating those one-shots and then activating the loops. To bypass this problem, I patched an attenuverter from the Make Noise module Maths to an external input on the bitbox. I can route this external input to the filter of the kick drum to act as a modulator. Now, I can control the kick filter using the channel 3 knob. I can high pass the kick to take out the low end for a bar and then bring the filter back while simultaneously activating another loop. This is going to create more impact when you do transitions, especially in EDM. Another effect I have going on during the performance is sidechaining on the melody. We're going to get to the melody later, but I will show you how to create the sidechain key in order to get the pumping effect for future reference. To get this effect for the bitbox, I've routed all of the outputs for each one-shot sample and loop to output 1, and for the kick drum, I've set it to go through output 1 and 2. I did this because you can hear all of the drums in mono if they go out through output 1 and go to the mixer, while output 2 serves as an external channel for the kick drum trigger sound to be sent out to the Maths module. I'm going to patch output 2 into the trigger input on channel 4 for the Maths module. Anytime any voltage control is received through the trigger inputs on the Maths module, it will create an envelope follower. You can patch that envelope anywhere you'd like. For the envelope follower, we're going to set the envelope to have no attack. We're going to give it a little bit of decay, and we're going to make the curve of the envelope a little bit exponential, so it's a very sharp envelope. We're also going to turn the attenuverter for channel 4 to a negative, so that instead of the envelope going upwards, it's going to be negatively affecting anything that it's patched to. So think of a downwards envelope. Next thing you want to do is patch the output of channel 4 into a VCA mod in on any VCA module. On the VCA module, you're going to want to set the amount of modulation that can be applied by any input for the VCA mod in. I'm going to apply full amount, and I'm going to leave it at that. You have a sidechain key. Anything that passes through this VCA will start pumping. Here's an example. The bass used in the performance came from the Moog DFAM, which is a semi-modular percussive synthesizer, which means that most of the sound design can take place on the module itself without actually having to utilize much of the patch bay. This module features dual oscillators with a noise generator to generate different timbres for different analog percussive sounds. It features envelopes that control the frequency of VCO1 and VCO2, which can give it the percussive sound because you're dropping a certain pitch to a higher or lower octave in a very, very quick amount of time. As you can see, I have no decay on the pitch envelope. VCO1 is set to a square wave and the frequency is set to about 12 o'clock. VCO2 is set to a triangle wave and its frequency is set around 10 o'clock. In the mixer settings, VCO2 is all the way up and VCO1 is a little bit less than halfway up. There's also a little bit of noise that I'm introducing, but you won't really be able to hear it. This module also allows a little bit of frequency modulation from VCO1 affecting VCO2. I set this knob at about halfway, and this will give the sound that it generates a little bit more of a grungy feel. There is also a cutoff filter that starts at 12 o'clock-ish, and there's a VCF mod that moves it up to about 3 o'clock. This filter envelope has a little bit of decay. Also on the filter, there is a noise VCF mod. What this knob does is modulate the filter with the noise generator, so it gives the filter and the whole sound in general a little bit more of this grainy, lo-fi distorted sound. The last envelope is for the voltage controlled amplifier. It is set to have a slow attack, and you can open up the VCA decay. As you open this up more and more, you'll hear more and more of a drawn out bass sound. I manually modulated the VCA decay so that the sound could go from a little bit of a pizzicato noise to a more sustained bass line, and you can hear this prominently in the intro. The DFAM also offers an 8-step sequencer that can affect pitch and velocity. There is a switch that enables the pitch modulation on each step. At the beginning of the performance, I leave it off. When it gets to the chorus or the more melodic parts of the performance, I switch it on. On the DFAM, you can clarify where it will start and stop the groove based on where you place the step and then press run stop. I set the step to number 4 so that when I press run stop, the first beat it will hit is the note on step 5. The only reason I did this is just because I liked the groove that it generated against the drums. Next, let's look at some modulation in the patch bay. To keep the pattern playing on the DFAM interesting, I patched a slow LFO from my Pittsburgh Mod Tools module to the Noise VCF mod on the DFAM. As I stated before, the Noise VCF mod allows the noise generator to modulate the filter. Because this LFO is now affecting the modulation in the patch bay, anytime the LFO reaches its highest point, you're going to be hearing the DFAM getting dirtier and dirtier. The next thing that I'm going to do to the DFAM to make it more interesting over time is patch the output from sequence 1 of the mimetic digitalis, and I'm going to patch that into the VCO2 CV so that it affects the pitch of VCO2. So now we get this bass loop that changes in pitch over time rather than just the same loop over and over again. Instead of just taking the output of the pitch sequencer straight into VCO2, we're going to take the output of sequence 1 and pass it through a mult so that we can duplicate the pitch signal, because we also have to send the pitch to the Platts module for the chords. This modulation becomes even more apparent when you switch on the pitch modulation on the DFAM steps. What's happening is that VCO2 is being affected by the sequencer pitch from the mimetic digitalis and changing note intervals, while also playing the melodies from the pitch steps, so you get the same melody repeating over different pitch intervals. Last but not least, let's talk about the melodic chords that come in at the second half of the performance. The chords come from my Mutable Instruments' Platts module. Platts is a digital controlled oscillator with 8 synthesis models for pitched sounds and 8 synthesis models for noise and percussion sounds. I've set my voice mode to chords to play minor ninths, and I've messed with the chord inversions and the oscillator voice until I liked what I had. Our first set of modulation for the Platts module is going to be pitch. So we're going to plug in the duplicate of the pitch sequencer from the mimetic digitalis and plug that into the volts per octave on the Platts. Now the chords will play back based off of the pitch received from the mimetic digitalis. The next thing I wanted to add was a little bit of glide or wobble, this type of effect you get when you're playing a vinyl record and it kind of bends out of pitch a little bit. You'll see this a lot with a lot of lo-fi songs. To give the chords a little bit of glide, I'm going to patch a sine wave LFO from my Pittsburgh Mod Tools into the maths in channel 2. I'm going to adjust the attenuverter to lower the depth of the modulation so that the glide won't be super strong where it goes woo. Here's an example. So as you can see, we definitely want to keep the LFO modulation kind of tame. So what you do with attenuverters is you attenuate the signal. You get rid of some of that depth. So we're going to go through channel 2. We're going to turn this number 2 knob like a little bit to the left to subtract some of that depth. And then we're going to patch out through the channel 2 and into the frequency modulation on the Platts module. Of course, we're also going to set the amount of frequency modulation, and by this I mean pitch modulation, because there's not like two waves interacting with each other in that sense. So I've just turned the FM a little bit to the left so that the pitch kind of glides downward. So let's check it out. This effect is similar to how very vintage analog synthesizer oscillators kind of bend in and out of tune. So that's the type of effect we're going to go for. Next, from this point on, we're just going to add a lot of effects to get it to be more lo-fi sounding. The first effect I want to pass these chords through is a bit crusher. We can achieve this effect by using the Pittsburgh Lifeforms mod tools. On one of the sections, you'll see that there is a noise generator and a sample and hold area. This area also doubles as a bit crushing effect. The way that you achieve this effect is by running a sound through the sample input and also inputting a square wave through the hold input. Your square wave is going to act like your bit depth. The lower the frequency, the less resolution you have on your sample. The higher the frequency and the faster the waveform is with all those bits, the higher resolution you're going to get with your sound. So we're going to pass the chords through the sample input, and we're going to grab the square wave output from VCO1 on the DFAM and plug that in through the hold area. Because we're using VCO1, which has a square wave on the DFAM, we do have to raise the frequency knob in order to get that high resolution chord sound. So during one of the transitions in the song, you'll notice that as I bring the chords up in the mix in volume, you'll notice that I also bring up the frequency of VCO1. So you have to transition by bringing up the chords along with the frequency level so that you don't get this really crappy like 8-bit noise just showing up in the mix. After getting that lo-fi sound, we're going to lower the high fidelity even more by passing the bit crushed chords through a filter and cutting off some of the high end so that we don't hear as much of that kind of 8-bit buzzing. I'm going to send the output from the mod tools into my Dopefer A121-3 compact VCF module, and I'm just going to lower the low pass filter a little bit and send that out to a VCA. Now that we have our lo-fi chord sound, we're going to pass that through the Behringer 130 VCA module, and we're also going to pass the output of VCO2 from the DFAM through the VCA module. The reason I'm patching the output of the VCO2 off the DFAM is because that's the oscillator that we've affected with a lot of pitch, and there's also a lot of pitch modulation from the 8-step sequencer on the DFAM. So the chords are going to be our chords, and VCO2 on the DFAM is going to be our melody that's going to be affected in the chorus. So I've gone ahead and repatched the clock for the bitbox and repatched all of the settings we had when we created our sidechain, and it is currently going through the VCA mod. So now we're going to input our chords and our melody into the VCA and then see how that sounds. So you can start to see how this is all coming together. We've got our melody, our chords, and it's sidechained. What next? Well, now we're going to take the output of the VCA and plug it through some reverb and then it's going to go out to the mixer. I'm going to send the output of the VCA into Erica Synth's Black Hole DSP2, which is a multi-effects module. We're going to add some big hall reverb. There's going to be like a little bit of halfway up with the pre-delay. We're going to turn the tone all the way to max, and we're going to turn the size to about 11 o'clock. Whenever we want to fade out the sound, I'm going to turn up the size. The size is parameter 2, in case you're wondering. And the total wetness level for the reverb is set at around 9 o'clock. Now, you may be wondering how I control the level of the chords and the melody. Well, I actually use the input level on the reverb module, just so I don't have to go to the mixer and try to reach in and turn the knob. So I'm going to show you how I do that. So for the performance, I really utilize that wet dry knob and that size knob, because as you turn up the size of a reverb, it fades more and more into the background because you're simulating a way bigger room, and as you turn up that reverb level, it just keeps on fading into the background. So this is really good for things like outros or the end of a certain part, so you can transition. And as I fade into the background by turning up that wetness, um, I also turn down the input level so that I can get rid of it. So that's what I do at the end of the performance for Grandizer. And we're just going to look back over the mixer and then show you all of the inputs and outputs and just show you the whole thing put together. So with everything together, you should have 3 sound sources going out to the mixer. The first one should be the drums all together going through one source. Let me unmute these. You can play your loops. The second thing that you should have going to your mixer is the bass. So this is the total output of both VCO1 and VCO2 on the DFAM. This is the actual VCA on the semi-modular unit. The third thing that you should have going to your mixer is your chords and melody together. These both pass through the same VCA and through the reverb and go out together in stereo. So now, if I play them all together, so that is my breakdown of the 3 main areas that you have to patch, which are the drums, the chords, melody, and the bass. And I hope this was helpful. We went over things like attenuverter for LFO depth and side chaining. We went over things like for reverb and duplication for certain signals. So I really hope this was helpful to people watching, or you found this interesting. go ahead watch the actual performance so you just kind of see it like all together, because right now this is just a version that I'm putting together just for the tutorial, and it's slightly different but basically the same idea. Thanks for watching, and I'm out.